There's a certain kind of overthinker whose pain didn't begin in adulthood. It began in childhood. They weren't loud. They weren't demanding. They didn't throw tantrums or fight for attention. They just learned to stay quiet. Ignored children don't stop wanting love. They just learn how to survive without it. And when a child grows up feeling unseen, their mind begins to work overtime, creating explanations, imagining reasons, filling the silence with thoughts. That's how overthinking begins. Carl Jung once said that what the child doesn't receive, the adult will search for endlessly. So when a child's emotions are ignored, they grow into adults who try to understand everything because they were never understood. They start to believe that if they can just figure out what went wrong, if they can find the reason why they were ignored, maybe they can finally feel safe. But safety doesn't come from logic. It comes from being seen. And that's something the overthinker was never taught. So they build safety in their minds instead. Every situation, every word, every look, they analyze it, replay it, break it apart, trying to make sense of what they feel. Because when you grow up in silence, you learn to fill the silence with thoughts. A child who wasn't heard becomes an adult who listens too much, to tone, to pauses, to what wasn't said. They read every detail because they once had to guess everything. They scan people for signs of rejection, for shifts in mood, for hidden anger, for anything that might hurt them. Because when you grow up, never knowing what's safe, your mind never stops preparing for danger. That's the real meaning behind overthinking. It's not confusion. It's defense. The ignored child grows into an adult who believes that thinking will protect them from pain. If they can predict it, maybe they won't have to feel it again. But it never works that way, because pain isn't logic, it's memory. And no amount of thought can rewrite a childhood where love felt distant. Ignored children become the quiet ones, the helpers, the fixers, the ones who sense tension before anyone else does, the ones who always apologize even when it's not their fault. Because deep down, their mind learned one rule. If I can understand what others need, maybe they won't leave. That's why they overthink. Not because they want to, but because it's the only way they learned to feel safe. They analyze texts, tones, pauses, looks, not out of insecurity, but out of habit. Because once, their world depended on guessing what others felt without being told. A parent's silence, a teacher's disappointment, a friend's withdrawal, all became puzzles their young mind had to solve. And so, thinking became their form of control. It gave them a false sense of safety in a world that felt unpredictable. But now, as adults, that same survival skill has become a prison. Every thought is a warning. Every silence feels like rejection. Every unanswered message feels like abandonment. The child who was ignored still lives inside, whispering, "Did I do something wrong again?" But the truth is, they never did anything wrong. They were just small, and no one explained what love really was. No one showed them that being noticed and being worthy are not the same thing. And because no one told them that, they grew up trying to earn love through effort, by being perfect, helpful, or endlessly understanding. They became the people who fix everything but themselves, who comfort everyone else but never ask for comfort, who overthink every word they say because deep down they're still trying not to be too much. Ignored children grow into adults who can't rest, because resting feels unsafe. Their mind tells them, if I stop thinking, something bad will happen. That's not paranoia. That's conditioning. It's what happens when a child's emotional world is left unattended. They take responsibility for everything. If someone is angry, it must be their fault. If someone leaves, it must be because they weren't good enough. And that belief follows them for life unless they unlearn it consciously. Carl Jung said that the child's early environment becomes the foundation of their unconscious mind. If that foundation is silence, then adulthood becomes a constant echo of that silence. No matter how much love they receive later, it never feels secure. Because deep down, the child still believes. It can disappear at any moment. And so, they overthink love. They overthink peace. They overthink happiness. Because all of it feels temporary. But here's the truth. Overthinking is not who they are. It's what they had to become. It's not weakness. It's survival. It's the mind's way of saying, I didn't feel safe then, so I'll try to be safe now. The problem is, safety built on fear never feels peaceful. It only feels exhausting. Because when your mind is always working, your heart never gets to rest. When a child grows up unseen, their world becomes a guessing game. They start watching everything: people's moods, tone, footsteps, the way doors close. They study emotions the way other children study colors. Because no one tells them what's wrong. No one explains why love sometimes disappears. And in that confusion, their mind begins to protect them the only way it can, by thinking overthinking is not just a habit. It's an emotional defense system, built in silence. It's the mind's way of saying, if I can predict pain, maybe it won't surprise me again. Carl Jung said that every unspoken emotion becomes part of the unconscious. Ignored children carry that unspoken world into adulthood, a mind full of invisible echoes. They think before they speak, replay every conversation, and feel responsible for everyone's comfort. Because as children, they were never taught that love could stay even when they made mistakes. So they learn to earn peace. They become emotionally careful, too careful. They don't trust happiness, because happiness used to vanish without warning. They don't trust silence, because silence once meant rejection. They don't trust love, because love once meant waiting. That's how silence turns into thought, and thought turns into overthinking. The ignored child becomes the adult who notices everything. They can sense tension in a room before anyone says a word. They can tell when someone's lying just by how they breathe. They see patterns, connect dots, and understand emotions faster than others. It looks like emotional intelligence, and it is, but it's born from survival, not serenity. Because when you had to read people to stay safe, awareness becomes instinct. It becomes exhausting to turn off. Even in peace, their mind is scanning for danger. Even in love, they're preparing for loss. Even in silence, they're bracing for noise. That's why many overthinkers find it hard to relax. Their brain was never trained for rest. It was trained for readiness. Jung believed that the child who was forced to grow inward carries that inwardness for life. They turn pain into imagination, fear into sensitivity, and neglect into perception. They become philosophers, artists, healers, people who feel the world in ways others can't. But along with that gift comes the curse of awareness, the inability to shut off the mind that once saved them. It's why they're drawn to broken people. They see pain. They recognize. They feel a duty to fix what looks familiar. But in trying to heal others, they end up reliving their own wounds. Because the child inside them still believes, if I can fix their pain, maybe someone will finally fix mine. That's why healing for overthinkers isn't about thinking less. It's about feeling more. It's about realizing that awareness without emotion is just control. And control is not love. The mind that grew in silence needs permission to feel safe in noise, to speak without rehearsing, to rest without guilt, to be seen without shrinking. Healing begins when you stop using thought as a shield. When you realize that you don't have to earn peace by understanding pain, you can simply allow peace by feeling it. The overthinking mind tries to solve emotions like puzzles. But emotions aren't problems. They're messengers. They're saying, you were ignored, but you mattered. You were silent, but you were worthy. You don't have to think your way out of the past. You have to listen to the child who lived it. Because that child doesn't want answers. They just want to be held. Healing for an overthinker doesn't begin when the mind becomes quiet. It begins when the heart finally feels safe enough to make noise. Ignored children grow up believing silence is strength. They think that if they don't talk about pain, it will disappear. They learn to smile while analyzing everything inside. But silence doesn't heal. It only buries. And buried emotions don't die. They wait. They wait for love to wake them, for peace to remind them that it's safe to feel again. Carl Jung believed that every wound carries its own cure, that what once made you suffer can also lead you back to yourself. For the overthinker, that means learning to turn their awareness inward, not to find what's wrong, but to hold what was ignored. Because the truth is, most overthinkers already know why they are the way they are. They've traced every cause, connected every dot, read every self-help line. They don't need more logic. They need gentleness. They need permission to exist without solving themselves. That's the real challenge, to stop using thought as armor and start using awareness as compassion. When ignored, children grow up. Their mind becomes their parent. It tries to protect them, guide them, and make sense of what hurt them. But the mind can't give what the child needed most: warmth. Only the heart can. And that's where healing begins. When you stop asking, "Why did they ignore me?" and start asking, "How can I love myself now?" Because the pain isn't in the past anymore. It's in the patterns you repeat trying to fix it. Overthinkers often choose people who remind them of their childhood, emotionally distant, unpredictable, unavailable, not because they enjoy suffering, but because their mind is still trying to win the love it never got. They replay their pain, hoping the story will end differently this time. But it never does, because what's broken in the heart can't be repaired through the mind. It must be felt. That's why Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Overthinking is the unconscious crying for attention. It's the child within trying to speak in the only language it knows: thought. Healing means learning a new language: presence. It's about replacing "what's wrong with me" with "what do I need right now?" It's about responding to your thoughts the way a loving parent would respond to a scared child, with patience, not punishment. You begin to realize that not every silence means rejection. Not every delay means danger. Not every ending means you were unworthy. The world isn't ignoring you anymore. Your mind just learned to expect it. So you start giving yourself the things you once waited for. You validate your own feelings. You listen when your heart whispers instead of waiting until it screams. You rest, even when your thoughts tell you you haven't done enough. You forgive yourself for not knowing how to stop overthinking sooner. And little by little, the child who once overanalyzed everything begins to trust life again. They learn that not every thought is a warning. Some are just echoes of a scared version of you that no longer needs to lead. That's when awareness becomes healing. When you stop using it to predict pain and start using it to prevent self-abandonment. Because healing isn't about thinking less, it's about thinking differently. It's about seeing thoughts not as threats, but as signals, messages from the parts of you that were left waiting in childhood. When you finally sit with those parts, they stop screaming. When you finally listen, they stop shouting for attention through anxiety. When you finally love them, they stop overthinking everything just to stay alive. That's what Jung meant when he said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And who you are was never the overthinker. That was just the child trying to survive silence. The real you is the one learning, slowly and bravely, to find peace inside your own mind, not because the world got quieter, but because you did. You didn't overthink because you were weak. You overthought because no one ever explained the silence. And maybe it's not your fault for always needing answers. You just needed someone who cared enough to listen. If this video felt like something you've always wanted to say, like comment and subscribe to Psychatic, where silence is understood and healing finally begins.